Hey, what's up guys? Thank you for tuning in to this review on the loamwolf.com of the mixed wheel monster that is the Commencal Meta SX V5. Stay tuned to learn all about it and find out how it's performed in this review on loamwolf.com. Let's go. Yes, this is the latest version of Commencal's Meta SX, their hard-hitting mixed wheel enduro bike with SuperCross in its name. You know it's going to be designed for a good time. The Meta SX V5 saw Commencal's VCS, or Virtual Contact System, suspension system employed to deliver 165mm of rear travel for the mixed wheel setup, which is paired with a 170mm fork. This VCS system gives totally different kinematics and a very different look to the frame compared to the outgoing version, but at its heart, it's very much a Commencal. That is, it is made from aluminium. Commencal is committed to not making carbon fiber frames for a number of different reasons, from worker conditions through to recyclability and the amount of energy that it uses to make a carbon fiber frame. So they reckon, as well as performance, Commencal downhill bikes have won many downhill World Cups in recent years, and they reckon that the aluminium is their preference in terms of performance as well and the handling characteristics of their bikes. It's a fairly high quality frame these days from Commencal, so you get all of the kind of high quality features that you would expect from internal cable routing, which is optional through the headset but comes as standard with ports in the head tube, which many people will be very pleased about. They use ports that bolt on to help keep rattling to a minimum, and then there's a kind of an exposed section as it goes from the front to the rear triangle, which Commencal reckons is the best way to route the cables on this frame. There's plenty of space inside the front triangle for a water bottle, good protection with a bolt-on down tube cover, an optional shuttle guard that comes included in the box, and then generous seat stay and chain stay protection. And then the rear end is given a huge amount of clearance to clear up to a 2.6, probably a 2.8 inch tire in the rear of that frame without any issues with mud buildup. Frame weights are claimed at about 3.3 kilos or just over 7 pounds for the frame, which we would imagine is for the size small and will get slightly heavier as you go up the size range. But these frames are now being tested to the EFBE level 5 standard. This is the most kind of aggressive, the tri-test, gravity testing standard in mountain biking right now. So you should imagine that the Meta SX V5 is going to be up to a huge amount of abuse. And to back up the durability overall, the new VCS suspension system is given double seal bearings and locking collet hardware to keep things nice and stiff and sturdy and tight for plenty of punishment out on the trails. Taking a look at the characteristics of that virtual contact system suspension, the 165mm of travel has around about 16% of maximum progression, but the leverage curve does have a bit of a regressive section at the end, meaning it's ideally suited to an air shock like this Fox Flotex 2 that we've got fitted here. Anti-squat hovers at about 125% at sag, but then drops off quickly through the travel, minimizing the amount of pedal feedback deeper into the stroke. And Commencal really focused on giving this frame a nice and neutral braking characteristic to keep you nice and comfortable, whether you're on the brakes or not. Commencal gave the Meta SX V5 fairly typical enduro geometry with a 64-degree head tube angle, about a 77.5-degree effective seat tube angle, and a 480mm reach on the size large frame that we tested here. They do have a slightly size-specific rear end, so small and medium get a 442mm rear end, whereas the large and the extra large grow to 447mm to better balance you between the wheels. And then what is quite notable is that the bottom bracket is 4mm above the rear axle, which is fairly high, about 355mm off the ground, which definitely gives it a unique handling characteristic, which we'll talk about a little bit in the riding impressions. Commencal offers the Meta SX V5 in a range of builds from the entry-level ride at $3,800 all the way up to the T-Type build with SRAM's Axis T-Type transmission on there for $6,900. We tested the second from top level build, the Signature that you see here, which comes in at $6,200 and is certainly decked out in a bunch of components you'd really like to see on a high-end enduro bike like this. You've got Fox factory suspension with the 38 170mm up front and the Float X2 rear shock on there. You get a full Shimano XT drivetrain and brakes, so the 4-pot brakes, the 203mm rotors on both ends, and then the XT 12-speed drivetrain, including the aluminium crank. You get a DT Swiss EX 1700 wheel set, which is wrapped in a Schwalbe tyre combination, the Big Betty and Magic Mary, but it is a super trail with a soft rubber, which isn't quite the tyre combination that we'd love to see on a hard-hitting enduro bike like this. Then you've got the Fox factory transfer dropper post, a Renthal aluminium cockpit, and a Physique saddle on there. All in all, certainly a high quality build. There's a couple of omissions that we would love to see changed, especially those tyres, but certainly didn't leave us all that much to complain about once we got it out onto the trails. It had been all the way back in 2017 since I'd last been on a Commencal Meta, and I was certainly excited to get on the new SX V5 because, I mean, just look at it, it's an absolutely stunning bike, and especially with the edit with Theo Erlangsen to release it, I was certainly filled with a lot of confidence that this thing was going to be an absolute riot. The full build, as you see it here, weighed in at 16.5 kilos or 36.4 pounds. And given that it had Super Trail tyres on it, I wasn't overly impressed by that weight figure, especially once I swapped out these tyres for a set of Schwalbe Albert radial gravities, which I think are a little bit more fitting to a hard-hitting bike like this. Yeah, certainly overall build weight climbed up a little bit, and it's not a lightweight machine by any means. Commencal supplied this bike to me with a custom tune. They'd actually given it to one of their team mechanics to, set up for me based on my weight, 100 kilos or 220 pounds, and the rough riding style. And that was a really nice touch. I was really excited to get on a bike that had been custom tuned for me by a World Cup race mechanic. However, the reality of that, it's not necessarily Commencal's fault, but it actually made it slightly more difficult for me to set this bike up for me because, as you can imagine, I test a lot of different bikes. Size larges normally are given a particular tune that's probably in the region of 70 to 80 kilos for your typical size large rider. And as such, as a 100 kilo rider, the tunes are typically a little bit on the lightly damped side of things for me. So I've my riding style in general is adapted to make use of a bike with a slightly less compression tune than I should probably be riding. What that means is when Commencal tuned this bike for me, saying I'm a fairly aggressive 100 kilo rider, they obviously applied quite a firm compression tune to it. And as a result, I've ended up actually having to run this shock, not open, but definitely on the much lower end of the compression range than I'm used to. And what that meant is that, kind of assuming that I'm going to be in the right ballpark for normal on the Float X2 shock, I'd actually started off the test with a much firmer compression setting than I needed. And that meant that the first couple of rides, I was just left with a rear end that was giving me a lot more feedback than I'm used to. And as a result, the performance just took a little bit for me to get into a happy spot with the setup and really get comfortable and unlock the full capabilities of this machine. The Super Trail tyres as well, I persevered with them for the first few rides, and just because you have to run them at a higher inflated pressure compared to a gravity tyre that's a little bit more fitting for a bike like this, it meant I was given a lot less comfort out on the trails and a lot less grip as a result. So yeah, certainly swapping out for a gravity set of tyres made a big difference to the overall handling. There was also a lot of cable rattle from stock as well. Which took me a little bit to shake down exactly where it was. It turned out it was in the open section, just where it comes out the down tube of the frame, and the two cables were sort of rattling together or rattling in the exit ports. So it was just a little zip tie that needed to fix this, but until I got that sorted, there was a lot of vibration coming through the bike from that. And then also the slightly higher bottom bracket, I guess combined with the fairly firm compression tune, which was making the suspension ride fairly high in its travel, meant that I really felt like I was stood on top of the bike to start with. And it took a little bit of messing around with the suspension setup and the bar height to get myself into a comfortable position on the bike to really fully open the taps and see what the Commencal Meta SX V5 had to offer. Once I got there though, it took a little bit more time than I would like, and I'm used to spending kind of getting the bike set up into a happy place, but it certainly came alive. Once I made all of those changes, got the setup in a comfortable position, and I was really able to open the taps and put this thing to the test. On the way up the hill, the climbing position is solid. The climbing support that the VCS suspension system gives you is really nice, but there's no getting away from the overall bike weight. So if you're a rider who's really looking to set some, quick times going up the hill, especially on super technical and stop-start kind of terrain, this is maybe not going to be the bike for you. However, if you're just going to be climbing up fire roads, getting yourself up to the top in a fairly leisurely style, and then really you're focused on absolutely attacking and charging on the way down the hill, then this definitely isn't going to be a bike that you're going to be complaining about too much on the way up. Of course, tyre spec and everything makes a bigger difference, I would say, than the overall bike weight. So even though it is a fairly portly bike overall, it's not going to be a bike that's going to be holding you back, and I don't think it's going to detriment you overall that much in terms of the energy that you spend getting back up the hill. Once you've made it up to the top of the hill and it's time to drop in, that's really when the Commencal Meta SX V5 comes alive, as you might expect from a bike with SX or Supercross in its name. The balance is the thing that really struck me as being excellent on this bike. Typically, when you've got a mixed wheel enduro bike, they're going to take that 27.5-inch wheel in the rear and also take the opportunity to make the chainstays shorter. That yields a really nice playful ride, and for some riders in certain terrain, that can be absolutely fantastic fun. But in terms of when you're just trying to push really hard, go fast, you do want a slightly longer rear end, I would say, with a smaller rear wheel than compared to a 29er. And in this case, the 447mm rear end is on the longer side for a mixed wheel enduro bike, and I think Commencal's done a great job speccing that geometry number here, because it yields just great confidence, great stability, plenty of weight on the front wheel when you're pushing hard. But because you do still have that smaller rear wheel, you still get the clearance, still get the extra stiffness and strength of the rear wheel, and also a little bit extra agility from it, which makes for a really good, nice dynamic ride overall. The VCS suspension system is certainly, it is not a super plush, super terrain ironing bike. Even once I had wound out a bunch of the compression damping, it was still on the more supportive side. It's fairly linear overall in the grand scheme of things. It's not a mega progressive setup. And as such, yeah, you just end up with that little bit more kind of mid-stroke support rather than a super soft initial and then big ramp up towards the end. So yeah, it was a bike that rewarded pushing hard, really gave you good feedback from what was happening below the wheels, but it wasn't a bike that completely ironed out every single last bit of the terrain, which for some riders, especially such as myself, I prefer to have a little bit more feedback and a little bit more support from the suspension than just a bike that's going to completely erase everything. I prefer to have that kind of engagement and also just the feeling of support when you're pushing it super hard. And in that way, the VCS system and the Meta SX V5 have really delivered a ride that you can push super hard. People complained, or I've certainly heard concerns over stiffness and alignment of the Commencal frames. I found absolutely none of these issues at all. The stiffness was on par, if not on the slightly higher side of things. And then the alignment was really good. I took it apart, cycled the suspension, undid certain bits and redid them up to check how everything aligned and slotted together, and everything was really nicely toleranced, I would say. Of course, perhaps Commencal maybe chose the best one out of the bunch for me, I don't know, but in my mind I don't think there's major issues. This bike stayed nice and tight. It is a bit of a pain to get into the lower linkage, especially to tighten it. I did have to tighten one of them once at the start of testing, and after that it didn't come loose again, thankfully. But yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to get access into some of the hardware, but otherwise it's stayed tight, it stayed rattle-free, creak-free, and yeah, it's just offered great performance all around so far. The overall character of the Meta SX V5 is fairly neutral. Because that rear end is on the longer side, you get a little bit of stability given to you from that, but then because the head angle isn't ultra slack, because the BB is fairly high, it just gives you a little bit more agility overall, and it makes it a bike that doesn't have to be just on the highest of speed descents to come alive. You still get a little bit of agility retained to wind your way through the slightly tighter enduro trails. And I think Commencal's really nailed a good balance here. If you are just looking for the absolute most raked out, super long bike, then perhaps this isn't going to be it. But if you're just looking for a good all-rounder that's going to be stable enough to attack some rough and rowdy descents, but still fairly well mannered, albeit a little bit on the heavier side for the less gnarly descents, then the Meta SX V5 is definitely going to deliver there. Overall, the finish quality on the Meta SX V5 has been pretty good. The down tube protector is maybe a little bit on the fragile side. It did end up cracking pretty quickly, pretty early on in the test, when a bit of slate flicked up off the front wheel. But otherwise, everything's been pretty rattle-free once I sorted out that cable routing. The overall finish quality has been good. The paintwork is all right. It's chipped in a few places, but nothing, nothing of concern whatsoever. And I think just in the flesh, this thing looks really good. All the hardware feels solid, and it feels like a bike that's going to really stand up to the test of time, especially when you consider it's been tested to that tri-test level 5 standard, which is a super stringent test. So you can imagine it's probably going to be really strong in that respect. And then Commencal also backs it up with a lifetime warranty, which is great to see, to give you a little bit of peace of mind it's going to stand up to the abuse. All in all, the testing period on board the Commencal Meta SX V5 has been very enjoyable, and I really like what Commencal has done, striking a nice balance between agility and capability all around. Aside from the Super Trail tyre spec, Commencal has done a great job at putting together a killer build with the signature model here, and although the value is not incredible, it certainly seems about right pricing for a modern day build of this spec with a high quality aluminium frame. So kudos all around to Commencal for putting together a killer rig that looks absolutely stunning and has been a really, really good fun bike to test. Hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this video on the Commencal Meta SX V5. Give us a like if you've enjoyed it. Leave us a comment, let us know your thoughts on this rig. Is this bike on your radar? Do you have any questions that I haven't answered here? Do let us know down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more awesome content on awesome bikes like this. Also, please do consider heading to our members only page. Go hit the link in the description, find out all about it. But basically, you can get product to test for free from us. You can come join us along on shootouts and also become part of the community that we're trying to build here to give back to our readers and to help produce more awesome content on awesome bikes like this. Thank you very much for watching. Catch you out on the trails. I got a bit excited there.